That's one thing I wanted to say. Second is about just to deal with a few quick things. The Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile that was tested. The Russians tested it a day or so ago. This is the most powerful intercontinental ballistic missile ever built. It's not even, properly speaking, an intercontinental ballistic missile, because it has global reach. It can reach, not just go across continents, it can reach right anywhere in the globe, and it's capable of circumnavigating. It's of going over the South Pole and striking the United States from the south, where, of course, the US air defense and anti-missile systems, they don't have their radars. They're all looking north. So there's a massive thing. Now, what you probably aren't aware of, Gonzalo, is that there's been lots of talk over the last couple of days about the Russians supposedly desperate, supposedly losing the war in Ukraine, contemplating the use of nuclear weapons in tactical nuclear weapons to win in Ukraine. There's been, well, I mean, even no less a person than the director of the CIA, William Burns, actually seemed to give some life to that particular story. I mean, it was a crazy one. The Russians have said this is ridiculous, that they have no such plans, but that they consider it to be an example of mirror imaging. And I think that's probably true.
Yes.
So I think, and Alex thinks, we both think, that the Sarmat test was not just part of this missiles, test program. It was both.
Right.
It was also a warning and a reminder that if anybody has any such ideas.
Before we got on live, Alex was telling me about this missile, and he mentioned that it had a range of 18,000 kilometers. Is that correct?
Yes. That's correct. Yes.
Okay, because I just Googled this. I don't know this off the top of my head, but let's pretend that I did. But I just Googled the circumference of the Earth, which is 40,000 kilometers. So this missile can literally reach the antipode rather of wherever it's fired. It can literally go around the Earth.
Yes,
that is a powerful weapon. Okay,
absolutely.
But anyway, I don't think it's ballistic. Then it must be some sort of like glider, because a ballistic missile would literally get to the moon and back. But anyway, that's not important. The important thing is that if they have a missile like this, I think that you might be right, because to make such a test at such a weird moment, because this is a major test, because this is a major weapon system. So to make such a test now, it doesn't make sense. No. You see what I'm saying? Unless you're trying to send a very, very clear message.
Yes. I would also add, by the way, that it carries hypersonic warheads. So it has this enormous reach, and it carries hypersonic warheads as well. So it's got tremendous power and potential. But so I think that's what that's all about. And I agree. Now, Finland, Sweden joining NATO. I think this has been worked on for a very long time. I think this has been a plan that's been worked on in Sweden and Finland. The political class there have gradually been won over to this for a very long time. I think that Ukraine has provided both a pretext, but also in terms of bringing it on now, it's a kind of consolation prize for the NATO bureaucracy, because they are losing Ukraine. Now, I've had discussions with people about this. I want to stress again, I am not a military person. But what I understand is this: from a Russian point of view, having Ukraine join NATO would be an existential crisis. It's huge. Its location means that you put missiles there, you can reach right to the heart of the most important areas of Russia. That would have been a disaster for them. Having Finland and Sweden in NATO is not existential in the same way. More importantly, it simplifies Russian military planning. Because if there were ever to be a Third World War, which heaven forbid, the major battleground, it looks like, conventional battleground, would no longer be in Central Europe, but it would be in the Arctic. It would be useful for Russia, to say it straightforwardly, to occupy the Scandinavian peninsula. Doing that would have been extremely difficult while Finland and Sweden were neutral. So given the overwhelming preponderance of Russian power in this region, actually having Finland and Sweden in NATO actually simplifies Russian strategic planning. I don't want to give the impression that this is what the Russians want to see, but it's something that I have heard, and I believe it to be true.
I'm not 100% on this, to tell you the truth, because I've always felt that, Finland and Russia have deep financial ties and cultural ties.
Yes.
Regardless of the unpleasantness of 1939, 1940. Finland and Russia go a long ways back, even before the end of the Soviet Union. And so the Russians always viewed Finland as a buffer zone.
Yes.
And so for the Finns to decide to, join NATO, I think it's foolish of them. I think it's reckless.
Oh.
And the thing is, having a neutral buffer in Finland, kept NATO at bay, kept them, in Norway.
Yes.
I mean, Norway is a NATO member, right? I forget.
It is absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And so Sweden and Finland officially joining NATO, because, there was always a fiction that they weren't NATO, but they did join NATO. They were NATO interoperable. And so there was the fiction, and also it just reduced tension. Having them join NATO just amps up the tension. Even if it's really a bureaucratic move, and as a practical military matter, nothing really changes. It just increases the political tension, which I think is foolish. That's that there. So I'm not really sure that the Russians are. They might view it as simplification, but you have to understand now. All of a sudden, NATO can put, surface to surface missiles, right there in front of St. Petersburg.
Yes.
Okay. That's not something that I really like. Okay. I mean, nobody would like it. So it is a provocation. The other point I most vehemently disagree with you is that you talk about the Third World War as a future event, hopefully an event that won't happen. My friend, and you know how much I respect you, but I do believe that we are in the Third World War. It has been going on ever since this special military operation started, and there's no end in sight. It's economic, it's political, it's military, it's social. I think that we haven't even started to see the real social warfare that's going to start breaking out on both sides of the divide. By the way, there are going to be people in China, in Russia, that are not happy with the situation on that side of the divide, just as on the Western side, there are a whole host of people, ourselves included, by the way, who reject a mainstream narrative, who reject the blob or the swamp, or call it what you will. And so, it's the Third World War is happening already. That's I'm telling you this, with the deepest respect and regard, of course. But that's how I see it. I think that we're there. We just have to admit it to ourselves and start picking sides and figuring out how we're going to fight this thing, because it's happening.
Yes, I mean, I what I meant to say was, I mean, outright all-out combat operations between the Western powers and the Russians. We're not quite there yet, and that's what I meant. I hope we don't get that.
No, Alexander, we're there. We're there. Yeah. You have to keep in mind, the Ukrainian armed forces were NATO trained, NATO equipped. Yes, they used Russian tanks, Soviet tanks, yes. But in terms of communications and command and control, it was NATO. They were trained to NATO interoperability standards. And here's something key. The Ukrainian armed forces were the only ones of NATO's forces that had actual combat experience. because between 2013 and up until this point, they had this relentless grind in the Donbass that had gotten hotter in 2014, 15, and then cooled down, but it was still relentless over the past 8 years, 9 years. And now we have open war. These are the best, most experienced fighters that NATO had. If you think of it in those terms, then you understand why NATO decided deliberately not to get involved in this fight, because NATO was involved, and they got their behinds handed to them by the Russians in what is proving to be one of the most remarkable military encounters in the last 100 years.
Well,